terms of fuel efficiency and whatnot, but it also informs things like flammability for products for use in space and space travel.
One of my favorite experiments is when you burn a candle in so much we take for granted here on Earth just by living in 1G. I have a quick question. I got to settle this once and for all. Every bit of physics I know tells me you are in free fall towards Earth, which renders all of you weightless and everything in the International Space Station. So I would call that 0G. Where does NASA come off calling it micro-G?
Yep, that's a great question. I think the idea is just the concept that everything that has mass also has, produces a gravitational field. So we might be wrong to call it 0G just because, obviously everything around me does have a non-zero gravitational force associated with it.
Okay, so then, but they're very tiny gravitational forces, so we could just as easily call it nano-G, couldn't we?
Nano, pico, I'm not sure they actually calculated that, but it's definitely true that we are all in free fall around the planet, and we are experiencing the gravitational pull of Earth, which is actually what keeps us in orbit around Earth. So you could also look at it that way, that we're not 0G in that sense, but the free fall aspect of zero gravity, I'd say we're in it. Did we land ourselves on the right side of your argument?
I'm going to look up all my metric prefixes and see which one actually applies to how much gravity each one of you have on each other, and I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, and I think the other difference is that we are constantly disturbing this microgravity environment. So anytime we input a motion, if we're exercising on the treadmill or the cycle ergometer on ARED, we're disturbing that pure zero gravity force that maybe an experiment desires just by our human presence. So we're still disturbing that all the time.
So let's talk about food. There are different segments of the International Space Station representing different countries who participate. And so do each of you trade food with each other when you get bored with your meatloaf or something? I'm just curious how much food exchange goes on the International Space Station.
Well, we do. So NASA has a food lab, which you may know, and they develop most of our majority of the food that we as American astronauts eat. But the Russians also have a food lab, and we are actually allowed to choose a certain number of our food allocation from the Russian food system. So both Christina and I like exotic and different foods, and so we went with a maximum majority of Russian food that we could add. We also have some foods developed by the European Space Agency that we can add to that mix. We have a European Space Agency astronaut up here, so we get to sample a little bit more of that because he has a little bit more of that than other people. My goal was actually to fly with a Japanese astronaut because I love Japanese food and I really wanted some of that, but unfortunately we don't have any of that up here right now. But we do tend to share. The Russians will actually bring other things down to us and we'll trade favorites back and forth. So I think variety is very important for us up here, even more important than people would think. People that don't even care so much about food on the ground do tend to, in a long duration mission, feel the need to have some more variety and to make a difference in terms of just that boredom that develops otherwise.
I've eaten in restaurants in both Italy and in France, and I'm guessing the French and the Italians have no interest in trading food with anybody else.
Well, our Italian is pretty generous. I think one of the highlights on the food system is the lettuce experiment that we talked about earlier. Part of that, instead of sending all of the samples down to be analyzed by the ground team, we actually get to harvest and eat the lettuce. So we've had 2 harvests now where we get this fresh supplement lettuce to our diet, and that's a real treat. And we'll have another harvest the day before we celebrate Thanksgiving, so we're looking forward to that.
So I was curious about that. For long-term space travel, obviously there'll be some expectation that you grow your own food. And how close are we to growing all of your own food without requiring sort of supply chains, either to and from the space station or to and from Mars, if that's our ultimate destination?
Absolutely, great question. I think that right now we're at a place where we're learning the best, ways that we can grow things in space, but where we're really looking to go is to develop systems that are, one, closed-loop systems, so a system where we're using waste products from various sources and feeding those in to the actual plant development. And that can include our carbon dioxide cycle, our oxygen cycle, and our water cycle. And we actually have some really neat life support systems on board right now that are testing some of those technologies. Another aspect of the food system that really has to grow would be incorporating proteins. Right now we have lettuce as our main, crop that we've grown. We've grown different things up here. They've grown flowers. We're looking into starting into vegetables and fruits, but incorporating protein sources like peanuts or maybe legumes, I think, is the next sort of big leap. We're not quite there yet. As Jessica mentioned, we've had salad, and we joke sometimes that the caloric intake that we've used so far in growing it might be a little bit more than what we end up consuming. But obviously, the techniques are what's important, and proving out the systems and the operational concept.
I'm guessing that you're not going to anytime soon start traveling with farm animals, so likely all of your protein will come from plant-based sources, which would mean the future of space exploration would be vegetarian. That's what that sounds like.
Maybe, we're not sure. We also do have some other devices that are pretty exciting up here right now. We have one facility called the biofabrication facility, which is actually, the goal of that is to grow human organs in space. Now that's of course not for food or consumption. That is to contribute to the deficit of organ for transplant operations on the ground. By any kinds of efforts on the ground, when you are trying to produce these tissues and make these bioartificial tissues, there's some problems with the support structure for these. And so the theory is that in microgravity, we won't have that problem with the support structure, so we can better grow these bioartificial tissues and then turn them into complete organs. Going a little bit along with that with 3D printing, we have other 3D printers up here to make other pieces of hardware. The Russians also recently tested some animal cells, so some animal protein cells, to see whether or not they could 3D print meat. So there are some experiments that are trending in that direction as well.
Okay, I don't know why I didn't think of that. Of course, if you can lab grow proteins, meat proteins, then you never needed the animal in the first place, and then there's another source of protein for you. So excellent. I'm just curious, can you imagine a totally self-sustaining place on Mars? How soon do you think we can have a self-sustaining Mars colony? Are we counting that in decades now, not just years? Because we know you can get water on Mars, and there's fuel, maybe rocket fuel. If you could just elaborate a little bit about what's there on Mars already versus what, at least initially, we've got to bring there to help you survive.
Sure. Well, looking at the current outlook and some of NASA's long-term goals, talking about going back to the moon in the 2020s and then back to the Mars in maybe the late 2030s. So that would be sort of an initial visit. Some of the baseline mission design concepts would be for, a 15-month mission, a 3-year mission, somewhere in that range. To do a sustainable mission, I think we are definitely talking decades, but I think it's important to have the long-term goal always in mind. I've never been someone that has been a fan of terratransforming a planet to make it more Earth-like. I think that the excitement of going to a different planet would be utilizing the in situ resources that are there. So I would see something like a sustainable Mars establishment, to me, would always require some type of resupply, and even if that's just to make it livable and habitable in terms of what humans think of as habitable and livable, I think is the important thing, but using the in situ resources as well.
Yeah, I think if you were to drive across the United States, there's basically a supply chain there already for you. You can stop at the Quick Mart and get food, and something already brought the food there for you to then eat before you arrive. So maybe the idea of supply chain shouldn't be viewed as something so foreign, because we actually thrive on that here. I'm curious about the future of robotics and artificial intelligence. There's a whole camp, I'm not in this camp that I'm about to describe, that would say, do all space exploration with robots. Do all space exploration with robots, and then you don't even need people. You don't have to bring the robot back, so they're cheaper. And so I know you guys are astronauts, but I'm just wondering what kind of thinking you put into the idea of robot astronauts for the future.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people debate that as well. You know, maybe we even care about human space flight. Maybe we can do it all in with robotics. And I think the answer isn't one or the other. It's really a blend, and the two can be complementary for different purposes and for different reasons. We, of course, have had a lot of success sending satellites and sending rovers and other spacecraft. There are many, there have been several rovers on Mars that have provided of data already, and we haven't been there yet as people. So that's showing us that there are some things that we've already been able to do with these robotic spacecraft that we haven't done yet with humans. But of course, if you look at the other side, you look at the statistics and what these rovers were able to accomplish in terms of their exploration, sending the data back and being controlled by people on the ground and having that relayed back if they found something off nominal, something that where they wanted to different direction, that actually ends up taking months. And what the statistic that I've seen is that what a rover can do in months or even years, astronauts can do in minutes or hours, just because we have the capability to problem solve directly real time and then redirect as necessary. So I would see the future as involving both. I would love to go on a mission with robots as well. I mean, we could bring humans and robots together.
So just to be clear, your phrase off nominal really to the rest just mean weird.
That's right. Sorry for the vernacular there. Anything unexpected, anything not what wasn't programmed in, for example, by the people on the ground as to what the course would be. If we saw something more interesting or more scientifically valuable in another direction, we could redirect ourselves, whereas the rover might be programmed in one direction and miss out on an opportunity like that.
Promise me if any of you go to Mars and you see something off nominal, that you'll just say to NASA, I see something weird, okay? I want you to promise me here and now.
I'm not sure we can make those kind of promises to you.
A quick question just about politics. You guys have spacewalked, as so many visitors to the station do. You spacewalk together, and you see Earth, and that Earth does not have color-coded boundaries of countries. And so surely you get the news feed, and who's in conflict with whom, and who's spying, and who's fighting. This overview effect, which so much is written about, how do you see the future of politics in space versus what's going on down here on Earth? Can space be something that leads all peace movements on Earth? How much thinking have you guys done about the role that space can play in the future of this?
We both have been fortunate enough to experience that overview effect, and I do think that it has the option of improving the world in the way that you talk about. One thing that we've learned is that, we get the question a lot, do politics on Earth inform the way that you do your job on here with an international community? And I like to flip it around and say that the way we do things up here actually can inform our politics on Earth. So I think we do see this as an example of how we can work together for the greater good, for greater humanity, and the fact that we are more alike than we are different, and we all have the same goals, at our roots.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a specific example of that, both Christina and I launched here to the International Space Station, having trained a majority of our training in Russia, at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center with the Russian Space Agency. We launched on a Russian space vehicle to get here, and for many years now that has been our only means of coming to space. And so that is something that right now, in the current political climate, may be surprising to some people, but for us all up here, we're working together as one crew and as one team, and I think that space has this ability to actually transcend some of those problems that we're having on the ground. So hopefully, we here on the International Space Station can provide and maybe serve as an exemplary role model for people on the ground as well. Jokingly, I've often said maybe a lot of our world leaders
Ya lo voy a quitar.
La tercera edad. Ay, no mames.